respective roles at your agencies is working as far as people being happy at the agency, people staying motivated? What's working, and what do you see as particular challenges as well?
Actually, we were sixth. I wish we were fifth.
Oh, okay.
It's part of my performance plan this year to get us higher.
To get you higher, okay.
Yeah. I think in Social Security, what I would cite as the number one issue allowing us to remain fairly high in the rankings and really good at what we do is the mission. Our mission is extremely strong, I think, with the workforce that we've hired. And we obviously attempt to hire people who bring a very strong service ethic. And we're somewhat unique as a federal agency because we do serve the public directly through our hearing offices and field offices. I think that first and foremost keeps us always in a pretty good place. But it helps to have leadership that appreciates that work, understands the business that we're in, and keeps that ever present in the minds of the employees. And we were talking before this about the importance of engagement, and I'm glad Ron made some strong points about that, because I think at the end of the day, that's what will get us through these very difficult times. The degree to which our employees focus on the mission, keep their eye on the ball, and don't get distracted by some of the noise that I think is out there that I hopefully isn't intended to throw us off our game, but I think, quite frankly, our employees keep pretty focused on it.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. You know, we have at NASA an amazing mission. And in terms of brand, one of the best brands literally in the world. The only person who has more brand recognition than we do is Apple. So our employees come to work for NASA to pursue the science. And as long as we continue to give them interesting work in their field that some of them have spent 20 years preparing for, they will be a happy and engaged workforce. And I absolutely agree that that is the key. There are so many things we can't control. We cannot control whether we receive pay increases or not. We cannot control restrictions on travel. We cannot control restrictions on award budgets. But there are a lot of things that we can control, including investing in the development of our workforce, providing work-life flexibilities, providing interesting and engaging work for our employees. And those are the things that they actually care most about. When you look at that Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and you look at the information about salaries, that's just not, certainly having sufficient income is important. I'm not saying that it's not, but having interesting, engaging work, developing over a lifetime of a career, and having the opportunity to do something that you can be proud of are the most important things.
What about those agencies that, unlike SSA and NASA, have more of a difficult time in terms of employees saying, okay, this is the mission, I'm engaged in the mission. It doesn't exactly have the brand recognition that the Social Security Administration has or NASA has, or the obvious, tangible mission. What can those agencies do to better motivate employees and perhaps create a better sense of mission?
It's interesting, because I worked at several of those. I worked at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which was the best place to work in the federal government 3 times in a row. And until the tsunami hit the Japanese power plant, I guess probably a lot of Americans had never heard of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The federal government, though, is very much of a niche market in terms of employment. So, for example, when I worked at the U.S. International Trade Commission, pretty much all international economists know about the International Trade Commission, know what the mission of the organization is, and for those who choose government service, they choose to go there. And I think that a lot of the agencies that perhaps don't have the brand recognition of NASA, in their own professional community, they do have that recognition. And in some ways that's better, because you don't need 6,300 people to apply to be an astronaut. Especially when you're only hiring 12 or 15. What you need are 20 or 30 of the very, very best people. And when you have a niche market that you can focus on and really get to those people who are really committed to your mission, it can actually streamline things for you. So focusing your recruitment efforts toward those populations of people that have the best skill match to what you're doing now and what you will plan to do in the future is a great strategy.
Makes sense.
I guess what I would add to what Jeri's talking about is particularly today's workers who do make it into government, because most of us are not hiring that much these days, really do want to develop in their jobs. They come with expectations about how they can become better at whatever it is they're being hired to do. And I think organizations that bring folks in and really shift to a learning organization, to a model where employees are encouraged to take ownership of their careers and of their development, and then provide them with the tools they need to develop, whether it be online learning or opportunities to get training, on-the-job training, those rotations within the organization. Those kinds of things, I think, resonate with employees. So even if you don't have a long history, Social Security, we're 76 years old, so we have a very rich, sort of history that we use to draw people in to this enduring commitment to that kind of economic well-being for the population. But if you have an agency that doesn't have the great mission and the great recognition and branding, then you have to do the things that keep employees focused on the bottom line of their agency and on themselves and their own development. I think that goes a long way with people.
Well, let's talk about that as far as tools that managers can use to accomplish that goal when you don't have sort of the automatic selling point of a great mission. Obviously in this day and age, the first thing that gets slashed from a budget, as everybody knows, is training dollars, continuing education, things of that nature. What are some, I guess, strategies managers can use? Probably they have to be creative strategies to provide employees who deserve it and want it training, continuing education, when there isn't the money in the budget to necessarily send them somewhere. I mean, is it, using more online learning? What are some of the tools that are available?
Oh, I think, as bad as it might seem on some days, well, first of all, I would say that every federal government agency has a great mission. It's just the degree to which that is recognized in the public. But for the people that mission is important, it's the most important thing in the world. I have to say, after about 3 decades of public service, a little bit more actually, it has been worse. This is not the worst it has ever been. What's different this time is I think we're so much better prepared. The last time we went through a lot of this sort of thing, we did not yet have email. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have learning management systems. There were some basic infrastructure kinds of things that did not yet exist or were not available to the federal workforce. So as we look at career development and long-term career development, but also for the impact and the reduction of travel dollars that has on developing your workforce, we have more tools in our toolkit than we had the last couple of times that things, got a little rocky. Certainly online learning, either through a learning management system that your agency has or any number of others that you can buy into, is a great strategy. I think that is a strategy that is even more effective when combined with the opportunity to interact face-to-face, whether that's in person or by phone, if that's your only option, or by video teleconferencing. So one of the things that we're looking at is reducing the amount of time in the classroom for training that we're delivering, delivering the fundamentals through online learning so that when we bring people together, they start right in on their case studies and group projects and start working on those things where they really do need to be together. And that saves travel time, and that also saves costs for instructor training. I think, though, that if you're looking for one thing that can make a tremendous difference, that costs nothing, that is to have your senior leadership and your leadership chain all the way down to the first line supervisor tell people regularly that the work they do is important. And to just say it over and over and over again. And to also say how much they appreciate individual employees' contributions. That message can get lost in the noise, and I think it's just something that people assume that everyone understands that the work that they do is important. But I don't think that's an assumption we should make right now.
I mean, I imagine there's a lot of managers out there that are probably frustrated because they believe that wholeheartedly, but they may feel like they don't have a lot of control over that. They don't have control over whether or not senior leadership is empowering and motivating and telling people regularly that the work that they do is good. How do you overcome that obstacle if you are a manager?
Social Security has a little bit different dynamic than maybe some agencies because in addition to being so seasoned in terms of our being around and the expectations of the American public for what we do, we really do have kind of a monopoly. There's no school that will teach you how to process Title II and Title XVI claims and requests. For that reason, our training budget has to honor the entry-level training that we do. We develop our employees from the ground up, essentially, in those claims rep, service rep, benefit authorizer jobs. Beyond that, though, we have the same challenges as anybody else. And in this era when it is very difficult to keep people focused on the right things, leadership does become critical to that. And so our supervisory training, mid-level management training, senior executive training really does loom large because that is the part of the budget that is seen as very discretionary. Right. And we typically hit it whenever we get into these cycles where we don't have enough resources to keep all of the employees on board and to continue to develop people the way we would normally do it if we had a reasonable budget. And interestingly enough, Social Security is one of those agencies that people tend to perceive as having very deep pockets, and that is relatively true with regard to the trust fund. But with regard to the administrative budget, it's very lean. We operate at less than 2% of the total budget for our administrative overhead, and so our training budget is real tight. That's all the work we put into that when things are going fairly well tend to get eroded at times like this. Right. When the budget's very, very tight. How we keep the focus on the kinds of training people need to be giving in addition is really the challenge our managers and executives to do, similar to what Jeri's talking about with regard to recognition, to have conversations with employees about their skill gaps, to talk with them about the kinds of things they need to be focused on if they have a particular interest in a particular career destination. And so it becomes a very, as most supervisors and managers would probably view it, very labor-intensive dynamic because you have to take that time, just like you have to take the time to say thank you. You have to take the time to have those kinds of conversations. You can't just do it at the mid-year and end-of-year review. It needs to be an ongoing dialogue. People need to feel invested in. And if you're doing that job, and if that job is going on across all of your supervisors and managers, the impact of, I think, what we've been dealing with reduced budgets and things, don't seem as significant to those employees because they feel invested in just by virtue of the time and the conversations that managers, substantive, meaningful conversations about who they are as people and what they do for the organization, why it's important, and what they need to do to get better at what they do and what they need to do to move along the chain of command if that's their interest.
Do you think that now in government, and I realize that you can really only speak to your specific agencies, but given your experience across government, you know, you have a good window into the rest of the agencies. Are managers themselves, you know, looking a little bit away from employees now, but managers, are they getting the kind of training they need to be able to communicate effectively with their employees and motivate and talk to them about skill gaps and what they need and et cetera? Are they getting that that training and support from their bosses to be able to do that job?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's really uneven.
It is.
I think some agencies make that a priority. I think other agencies perhaps not. The other thing is that we have a bad habit of forgetting that most of the federal workforce is not in Washington, D.C., and that these managers are spread across the entire United States. And that actually makes it pretty hard because, you know, when you've got employees that are out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, delivering leadership training to them can be a challenge.
Right.
So I do think it's important, and I think you would not find anyone who didn't think it was important, but sometimes the challenges are difficult. And also, based on all these years of experience, I would say that in a restricted training budget, managers will not go to their own training so that they free up training dollars for the people who work for them. And that perhaps is short-sighted, but that is how they will react. They will take care of the people who work for them before they will, you know, go and engage in something themselves. That's my experience.
Well, I was going to say that's been mine as well, and I think, you know, and at times like this, we really have to resist the simple solutions.
Yeah.
You know, we really have to look at, and I think Ron was quite right to talk about keeping your options open. He referred to don't take reductions in force off the table.
Right.
Most of us in the human capital world would rather not go there if we could avoid it any other way, and we jettison things in an effort to try to avoid it. But I would say in this regard, you know, not doing training can be really damaging down the road when things do normalize. I had an experience a few years ago where we were going through a similar downturn in our budget because Social Security, interestingly enough, rarely gets what the president asks for. If you look at the last 20 years, we've probably got the president's requests maybe half dozen times. But you know, what we were looking at was how are we going to cut a few things to try to live within our resources. And you know, I've been hammering at this whole thing. We can't really afford not to train people, especially mid-level managers. I mean, they're the ones who we're really going to have to rely on to keep the mission going strong. And I was gratified when the Deputy Commissioner for Operations in a meeting to discuss this said, you know, because we had been preaching this and it had been ignored a few times. And she said, you know, I'm at that point. I get it now. I realize that you know, with the retirement wave playing out, with the number of supervisors that are turning over, the new supervisors that I have coming on, I cannot afford not to train these people in what they need to do as supervisors. Otherwise, we're going to have all kinds of issues with not following the labor agreements as we should, not necessarily knowing how to avoid some of the EEO, you know, vulnerabilities and issues of that nature. So. You know, we really do have to avoid the simple solutions, and sometimes it means reducing other things in the interest of making sure that, because you know, even the employee viewpoint survey seems to reinforce that leadership is significant in this context.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of too bad that it almost seems like things have to get to a crisis point sometimes before people in charge recognize we've got to make investments right now in these particular issues.
You need a catalyst.
True.
You know, so if you can make a catalyst,
create urgency
around an issue. You know, if by you know, taking a look around us and saying, you know, we are making decisions today that will, you know, about who we hire and who we train that are going to impact what our workforce looks like in the mid-2030s when human beings travel to Mars. So we need to think about that now. That's not such a bad thing.
And it is hard to get people to sort of buy into that without, you know, an impetus.
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about downsizing and how to do it intelligently. You touched on this a little bit, and obviously Ron did in the previous session. You know, there seems to be, you can't just take one tool out of the toolbox. You kind of have to look at what is there and use it intelligently. You know, how do managers do that? How do they create a plan whereby they can intelligently downsize their workforce without losing the people they need, without creating an environment where people are afraid or resentful or disenchanted? You know, what's the sort of game plan that people should follow to do that effectively?
Well, I think the focus should be on right-sizing. That is, your agency has a mission. It's supposed to fulfill. There are expectations that are centered around it, and you've got to go through a very careful analysis to basically map out how you can get from where you are to where you need to be with regard to that mission. And that's going to drive a certain resource level. Now, if there are shortfalls when you do that analysis, then obviously you need to do whatever course correction is necessary. To give you an example, right now we're pretty much on a hiring freeze, yet the workloads that we're expected to address continue to rise because as the retirements increase, that puts a lot of pressure on us as an agency. That's our workload. And as the economy struggles, we have more people applying for disability benefits, people who would normally work if the work was available, but with the work not being available, they resort to applying where they think they might be able to get a benefit to hold them over until such time as they can go back to work. And so our workloads are increasing, our staffing levels are reducing at the same time. And so, you know, how you manage that is really the key. And at times you have to, you know, I hate the expression doing more with less. Reality is if you are managing efficiently, and we can always manage more efficiently, but if you're managing efficiently, when you get less, you do less. That's just the reality of it. And so at times you have to recalibrate for your workforce what they're going to be focused on. You can't do everything when you don't have the resources to do everything. What's most important to the mission? Most of our agencies go above and beyond the mission. Most of our agencies are doing things because we had the resources to do it in a more grandiose way, perhaps, than the sort of baseline mission called for. Sometimes you have to fall back to that baseline and do the things that are most critical for now, and when you can do better, you do better.
Jeri?
Let's move on to the next question. I can't actually, I don't even remember what the question was.
Oh, no problem. Well, I do have a follow-up on that.
Okay.
Talking about right-sizing, you know, we've seen a great use of buyouts, early retirements for employees in the last year and a half because of the budget environment. Is that something, it's obviously a tool in the toolbox, but is it something that's being taken advantage of? Are agencies using it in the best way? It does seem to me a little bit, based on reporting, that people are not taking advantage of buyouts or early outs for various reasons, whether it's, you know, times are tight, they want to keep working, the economy is still not in great shape, or it's just not enough for them, you know, in terms of the financial incentive.
It's interesting because I've heard the same reporting you've heard. I've heard from OPM that the take rate on buyouts and early outs is like 2%. You know, we recently had a very dramatic shift in mission with the end of the Space Shuttle program, 35-year program. A lot of people hung out to the very end, and then we offered up early outs and buyouts, and we planned them very, very carefully. We developed a tool that allows people to get their information about early out, buyout, to apply online, and then lets us track on the back end how many takes we had and what the cost savings to the agency was. And at some of our centers, our take rate was 100%. At like headquarters, it was lower. It was more like 25 or 30, and then the other centers sort of distributed in the mid-range, but significantly higher than the federal government average. And I think that it was because we did a really, really good job of planning and a really, really good job of providing employees with the information that they needed to make this decision in a very timely way and in a very accurate way so that they could rely on the information that they had received. And because we did it smartly, we lined it up with the end of a major program where we really did need to make shifts in the skill mix of our organization, and the program had been a whole career, you know, more than 30 years. So we were just very thoughtful about it and just used it in a really appropriate way, and that's why I think we got such a good result. It's interesting about the RIF thing, because I don't know if you know, but Congress has suspended NASA's RIF authority. It's been suspended for many years, and you would think that when they were cutting a whole program and requiring us to make a complete shift in our mission, they would leave that tool in our toolbox, but no, they took it off the table. And
I
as
want to give you that challenge.
well, yeah, exactly. So as a result, we had to do long-range planning, more of an evolution as opposed to a hatchet. And we had to get very, very creative so that when we get to the end of this transition year, we more or less have our workforce set up where it needs to be. And in fact, that's what's happened. So I think it's a really good news story about how to do it tastefully, respectfully, and effectively.
If you're going to manage the workforce strategically, you've got to have the long view. You can't engage in knee-jerk kinds of adjustments. It's part of our DNA probably because we do have an office of the chief actuary, so we analyze, you know, sort of long view, short range view, but it also bleeds into how we go about our human capital management, because we were analyzing in the late 90s where some of this stuff was going to lead from a human capital perspective, the aging of our workforce. So we actually got our predictive models to the point where we knew by mission critical position how many folks we were going to lose. We didn't necessarily know who we were going to lose, but we knew within certain categories how many, and that allowed us to target and make adjustments that were very, very wise, smart moves.
Has that borne out, those analysis?
It has. We've come within our models, you know, routinely. And it's one of those things where I think we got to the point where we were offering early out every year for probably the last 12, 13, 14 years as a way of tweaking the workforce, because we always have, because of our lean budget, we've always had these sort of pressures on numbers of employees in certain categories, and so, you know, it sort of helped to use that even in the times when we had better budgets, just to make sure we were moving people through as it made sense. And the work we do is very, very grueling, you know, because we do serve the public. You know, you serve whomever comes through the door, and a lot of the folks who present for services are homeless, people with mental health issues, and that work is very, very demanding. So there are times when people get toward the very end of their career and they just don't have much left in the tank, and offering them an opportunity to go a little bit sooner is very, very helpful to our agency.
I want to pivot a little bit and talk about another segment of an agency workforce that gets a lot of press: the poor performers. And I know that, you know, managers and coworkers often get frustrated with people they perceive as not doing a great job and being allowed to continue on in that job, or even getting promoted, or just being ignored and left to, you know, do nothing. How do managers grapple with that problem? Because you know, managers some of them are reluctant to sort of pursue any sort of action against someone they perceive as a poor performer, because there are a lot of protections in place, and you know, there's always the threat of legal action. So in terms of restructuring a workforce, how do you look at the people that aren't performing as well? What do you do to sort of help them get to a place where they can perform well? But if that's not, going to happen, how do you kind of, I guess, artfully get them towards the exit?
Well, I think it starts with the training of your supervisory personnel. Supervisors, managers, executives have to be able and willing to take action that's appropriate for poor performance, whether that be retraining, progressive discipline, simply calling it as it is.
Mm-hmm.
We are again, unique in that we do have production standards that we get staked out on. The Office of Management and Budget, does track us on our productivity, and we typically hit those numbers. And you can't get there with poor performers, sort of dominating what you do. So I think we put a fair amount of emphasis in, supervising well, giving employees every opportunity to develop and do a good job in the organization. And in my experience, and I'm sure Jeri will bear this out, most people who present themselves to be a public servant, whether it be federal, state, or local, come with very, very good intentions. They want to make a difference. They want to leave things better than they found them. Very often they end up poor performers because we fail them as a system, as supervisors. We don't engage them, or they get put on a back burner relative to someone else who we think is, hitting on all cylinders, and we want that person to really do good things in the agency, and so they get ignored. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why people become poor performers. I think we really do have to put a lot of emphasis on how to reach them, give them an opportunity to cure, and if not, encourage them to move on to other careers or leave government,
right,
if that's the case, because we really can't, with things being so lean,
right,
the days of putting somebody on that back burner are gone. We
right,
need everybody engaged and committed to the mission.
Yeah, one thing that's always true is when hiring goes down, firing goes up. Because, managers are sitting there, they can't just go out and hire somebody, and all of a sudden the people they have sitting around don't look so nice, don't look so tasty anymore. So that is a cycle I've been through many, many times, and you will see that hiring will go down and employee relations cases will go up. I do think that we need some reform in this area, which would require legislation. But I also know for a fact that we do not use all of the tools that are available to us. For example, we have the ability, okay, now I'm going to talk technical talk for you HR people out there, but we have the ability to remove people under 75 actions for performance. We don't do it. We have the ability to downgrade people, to get them into a job that they can do well. Never seen that in 30 years. So I think there are things that we could do that we're not actually doing, and we should really contemplate. Because the one thing that I know, the thing that tugs on those supervisors' heartstrings, no matter how horrible this person may be, is the federal government retirement is sacred. And, by the time somebody gets, has put in a couple of decades and has gotten burnt out, they came with the best of intentions. Nobody wakes up and says, oh, I gotta go to work on their very first day.
Right.
I gotta go to work for NASA today. They don't do that. They come and they want to explore the universe, and then over time, for whatever reason,
they get beat down.
They get beat down. And, it's just, they get a couple decades invested in, and supervisors are very, very reluctant to pull that rug out from under their feet of the federal government retirement. So, we do definitely need some reforms in this area, but we should also take better advantage of the options that we have out there.
Yeah.
Beginning with how we do our performance management. Do poor performers realize they're poor performers?
Right.
I bet a lot of them don't.
A lot of them don't.
I think that's probably right. Do you think that there is a disconnect between managers and HR professionals as far as a lot of these issues are concerned, whether we're talking about downsizing, dealing with poor performers, hiring? Are managers sort of grappling with their own set of challenges and looking at it in one way, whereas HR professionals, because of their frame of reference, look at it in a different way?
Well, when I was asked to be in this particular position at Social Security, I had to ask the commissioner at the time, not that I was questioning her judgment, but I had to ask, why are you offering me this opportunity? And one of the things she said was, because for much of your career you were a line manager, and I wanted somebody who understood that dynamic. So in our case, yeah, there probably are places where there's a disconnect, but there certainly isn't one, I feel, where I am and where those line managers and line executives. Because you've been in those shoes. Because I've been in those shoes. I understand that dynamic. I understand what's important in doing that work. And a lot of our HR professionals do. Where there is the disconnect, though, you really have to work on that. One of the things we talk about in the field is being strategic partners with those other line and headquarters components, staff components, and it's really important that we understand each other. There is a lot of opportunity for disconnect, for misunderstanding, but in order for HR professionals to be good at their craft, they have to get down and dirty, frankly. They have to go and understand it from the perspective of those people that they serve. And if you're not doing that, then you're not really doing your job.
Yeah, I've always been very fortunate to work with HR professionals that were just at the top of their game, the very best in the business. And so, I mean, literally managers wouldn't dream of having a meeting without their HR consultant there with them because they value them. I don't think that's true across the whole federal government. Certainly we have done ourselves a disservice in the HR community with the focus on processing and backroom operations and not training our people to be good consultants to managers and not selecting people who have the basic skill set to be a good consultant. So I do think across the government there's work that needs to be done there. But having worked in places where it works really, really well, I can tell you that a manager who has an HR professional who's a good partner for them values that person tremendously.
Well, I think now we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. So, you want to have a woman over there? We'll be around with a microphone in a sec.
It's been my experience that the high performers are the ones that get burned out, and doing less with less is the right way to go. But that's not always the reality, especially in the first couple of years when budgets are being cut. You can't just automatically say we can't do that now. What's the best way to combat that and keep your high performers being high performers and not getting burnt out thinking they still have to do everything they were doing in the past, which may not be possible anymore?
Well, if I might address that, I think that's why leadership is so important. One of the most liberating things that happened at Social Security several years ago was Commissioner Barnhart actually went through an exercise with her executive team and identified areas where it was nice to do the work, but it wasn't essential to do the work. She recognized that we were burning our people out. And Social Security tends to hire, as I indicated earlier, people who are very service-oriented. They get real testy when they can't do the job you've asked them to do. And they will, kind of like the school teacher who doesn't get the school supplies, so she goes out and buys it herself, and brings it in for the students. We tend to have a workforce like that. They're working every day with people that come in with some of the most difficult life situations that you could imagine. That little old lady who didn't realize that she was due a survivor benefit when her husband died, or those kids that wouldn't have no opportunity to go to college unless there was a survivor benefit, or someone who didn't realize they were entitled to more retirement than they thought. Those are real life situations for our employees. And so they take it very seriously, and when you don't let them do that work, they get real agitated about that. And so it was important to the commissioner to sort of recognize that and cut back on certain workloads, because there's certain workloads we do that are even where they're mandated, that they don't really bring any benefit to the people we serve on a day-to-day basis. And so she gave permission to cut back on some of that, and it was tremendously rejuvenating for the field in terms of people being able to really focus on the things that were really, really important. Your point about superior performers, getting burned out, that's very, very real too. And when we revamped our performance management system under Commissioner Barnhart, it was really with that focus. We were in a pass-fail system, which had been put into place when we had to lower our ratio of supervisors to employees. And we went back to distinguishing performance even before OPM was requiring it as part of HCAF. So you really do, those employees, you really have to pay attention to thanking them and rewarding them as best you can, recognizing their extraordinary contributions. Because people know, you can go to any office and they will tell you who the superior performers are. There may be debate on who's a poor performer and who's a mediocre performer, but everybody looks to those superior performers as sort of peer leaders. And so you gotta know who they are and you gotta recognize them.
Next question. She's coming.
I have a follow-up question to that one and to your answer. So then, did you revise the performance management system and the critical elements in it to reflect management's decisions about what were the priorities now, or what were the essential tasks, and sort of set aside the things that weren't essential?
Yeah, in large part, we did. SSA had a really bad experience prior to my time with what they called numerics, being very analytical about the specific work that employees were being evaluated against. And we actually went to probably a hybrid where we built in some of those objective measures, but also retained measures that were more about the manner in which people went about performance rather than such a stringent focus on achieving numbers. When we did that, some supervisors went crazy with it. But we did make those adjustments, yes. And of course, labor, we have a very strong labor environment. We have 4 unions that we have to negotiate and work with. And they were very interested in making sure that we made those adjustments.
That is interesting. I'm from the Federal Labor Relations Authority, so I'm a little bit familiar with what you're talking about. But
Thank you.
I'd love to talk with you more about that.
Sure.
I'm interested, when you talked about Commissioner Barnhart taking that stance, wanting to make sure everybody knew in that particular environment that you don't have to do everything. I recognize the workload is going up and we don't have the people to do it. Was that something that she sort of came to naturally as a leader from observing the situation, or did she have conversations with people like you, other managers in the agency that brought that to her attention?
Both. I mean, she obviously, both. I've served under 2 commissioners, Commissioner Barnhart and our current commissioner, Commissioner Astor. Both keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on around the agency. They both are out. She was out and about, and he has been out and about trying to understand what's important to the workforce, and of course, balancing that with what we're required to do by Congress and what we've committed ourselves to do by our strategic plan. And it is a very, very fine balance. But she did both at that time. She listened to her subordinate executives and employees, and she made there were certain revelations that she had about what was getting us, sort of closer to what we need to be doing as an organization, given the resources we had. But it is a fine balance, and it requires a certain amount of courage to do that.
Yeah, certainly. It's not something that I think happens in a lot of agencies.
Yeah.
Jeri, did you want to speak to that?
Well, we do have some high potential programs at NASA. We have our NASA First program for people who are in the beginning of their career. It's a competitive program where, they get the opportunity to do a rotational assignment, a shadow assignment, those kinds of things. So I think all of those strategies are out there for you to use as well. I do think that you need to be clear who your high performers are. You need to make sure that they know that you know that they're a high performer. Sometimes I think you simply have to go into their office and tell them, you need to go home now. Because they will stay and stay and stay, and that burns them out faster than anything. But just making sure that they know that you know that they're a high performer, and making sure that they know that there are, if you have work-life programs, et cetera, that you're encouraging them to use those.
Flexible work schedules,
telework, exactly, because they're the employees who are going to handle those the best. And, make sure that they understand that you're really being supportive of them, and really being positive and proactive, giving them interesting work to work on. One of the big mistakes I see us make in the federal government all the time is the person who's the highest performer is the person who, we need them to do this work so they can't go to training, or we need them to do this work so they can't be in the SES.
You get punished for being good at your job.
You get punished for being good at your job, and you just have to really guard against that and make sure that those people have, all the opportunities, and that you use all of the tools in your toolkit to make sure that that person understands that they are appreciated.
And one of the things we do to avoid that problem is we have 3 highly touted career development programs in the agency, focused on different grade levels. And they are competitive, and they're agency-wide. And if a supervisor is treating an employee that way, that's one way the employee can get away from that supervisor and into a track that allows them to get the rotations, get the kinds of development and advancement that they need to move to another level.
Makes sense. Any other questions? One more.
Hi, I have 2 questions. Hopefully you can squeeze in answers. The first question is a comment and then a question. One of the things I've noticed and just observed over my years in the federal government is that there are some agencies that promote managers or promote people into management or leadership positions based on their technical expertise, and they may not have fine-tuned emotional intelligence. So I wonder what your agencies do to, as you move people into leadership positions, to make sure that you're focusing on emotional intelligence or picking people that have emotional intelligence. And then my second question is, over the next year, I'm interested to know what you're both going to be focused on to continue to transform your agencies. What's the 1 or 2 things that you're both doing within your organizations to take your organizations to the next level?
Well, NASA is a scientific and technical organization. All of our work is project-based, all the way up to the administrator. People are superior technical people. The administrator was a Marine Corps general, 4-time shuttle astronaut. He's an engineer. I mean, everybody has to be technically proficient. No one ever stops being a technical expert. So knowing that, and knowing their ability to over-interpret and over-analyze, as with many federal government employees, a couple of things that we do. We have our high potential program, NASA First, where we really focus on helping people from a younger, earlier in their career age start developing some of these interpersonal skills. Then we have what we call our MLLP, which is our mid-level leader program. Again, we've run like 500 people through these programs, really focusing in on networking, social interaction, leading people, self-awareness, and leadership development. And then we have our SES CDP. So we know we're going to be picking people to run these major programs. The Hubble Space Telescope, you have to be an astrophysicist, to run it. So we know that they're going to be technical people. So we just try to grab them early, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Does SSA have a similar sort of feeding system as far as, you know, the different levels and how people progress throughout their career. And then we'll have to wrap it up after Reggie speaks.
We do. And as I mentioned, we have those career development programs that are competitive and national. And so we have hundreds of people who we funnel through them. But SSA is going through an interesting transformation over the years, because similar to NASA, as I said earlier, you know, you don't come out of college knowing how to, or high school knowing how to do process a Title II claim or Title 16 claim, and so we have to grow that expertise within. Most of those people eventually go on to leadership jobs in the organization. Most of the executive and managerial talent in the agency is homegrown. We have gotten in recent years a little more open to bringing in people from other walks of life, other agencies, private sector. But for the most part, we're still growing those leaders from our technical workforce. And as Jeri points out, you know, the work of government is no less technical these days. It's getting more technical. So we've put a lot of energy into making sure that we are trying to help people develop their emotional intelligence, because we recognize their natural tendency is to be a technician. And we've seen that go haywire in recent years, and we address it because we understand that that is one of the weaknesses of our leadership cadre, is their natural tendency to look at things a certain way. So we spend a lot of time on that. Fortunately, I think we've gotten much better at having people who may be technical, but who really do get it, advance. So we really don't have, I think, the problems we used to with sort of highly technical people moving into, you know, senior executive jobs and not seeing the forest for the trees, because they're just so technical and they lack innovation and a feeling for the employees that are in their charge. It's extremely important. We're fortunate also, and I'll wrap it up with this, to have a commissioner and a deputy commissioner, Mike Astrew and Carolyn Colvin, both of whom really are transformational leaders. And what's interesting about it is that Commissioner Astrew was appointed by President Bush. Our deputy commissioner, Carolyn Colvin, was appointed by President Obama. And they both bring those kinds of qualities and that kind of interest in the workforce. So I you know, in spite of the budget woes, I think the future is bright with regard to that particular issue. And as we've seen from the EVS survey and other information, you know, leadership is real critical to transforming. So I think we're in a posture in a good place.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. I think this was a great discussion, and appreciate everyone's participation. Thanks again. Thank you. It was good.